If you're into both Greek and Egyptian mythology, there's a good chance you've noticed two stories attributed to each tradition that strangely appear to be copy-pastes of each other. The two stories I'm talking about are each segments of larger myths, those being the Egyptian myth of the death and resurrection of Osiris, and the Greek myth of the abduction of Persephone. Hi, Georgie. I've already made two cartoons inspired by those myths, but for the sake of context, I'll do quick recaps of them, this time just sticking to information available in ancient sources. In the Greek myth, Hades, king of the dead, abducts and marries the goddess Persephone at the behest of her father Zeus. Persephone's mother Demeter hears her cry out and begins searching for her, eventually going to the sun god Helios, who tells her exactly what happened. Demeter isn't too happy about this marriage arrangement, which was made by Zeus and Hades behind her back, and she grumpily travels to the city of Eleusis. Meanwhile, in the Egyptian myth, the god Osiris is killed by his brother Set and tossed into the Nile River encased in a metal coffin. The coffin drifts to the city of Byblos, where it washes up on a heather bush. The heather then grows into a massive tree, concealing Osiris's coffin inside its trunk, and then the king of Byblos chops it down to use as a pillar for his palace. Osiris's wife, the goddess Isis, who had been searching for him, eventually makes her way to Byblos after hearing about all of this. Now, it's at these points where the two stories come together. There are some minor differences, and the Greek version is a bit longer, but the following synopsis applies to both of them. The goddess, I'm talking about both Isis in Byblos and Demeter and Eleusis in their respective myths, disguises herself as a human woman and befriends some young ladies who take her to meet the queen of the city. And the queen thinks the disguised goddess is so smart and beautiful and classy that she hires her as a nurse for her newborn son. So the goddess takes care of the infant prince, and at night secretly places him on a hearth to gradually burn away his mortality and make him immortal. But one night the queen spies on them, sees her son on fire, and understandably freaks out, which interrupts and undoes the ritual. And the goddess is super annoyed by this, so she reveals her true form to give the queen a piece of her mind, and at this point the stories once again diverge. Demeter demands that the king of Eleusis builds a temple in her honor, and once built, she holes up in there and refuses to let any crops grow until her daughter is returned to her. Eventually, Persephone is brought back out, but since she ate some pomegranate seeds in the underworld, she still has to spend a portion of every year down there with her husband. Meanwhile, in Isis's story, she demands that the king of Byblos gives her the tree trunk, which she removes Osiris's body from, and the remaining wood becomes an object of worship in Byblos. Some more hijinks happen after that, but in the end, she's finally able to temporarily resurrect her husband so they can conceive Horus, Osiris's heir. Okay, so now we're left wondering why two different myths from two different cultures share within them the same B-plot. Let's call it the Magic Nanny story. Well, to unpack this, we need to look at how these myths actually got to us, the sources. But before we do that, I need to think of a clever segue into talking about this video's sponsor, Atlasvpn. Okay, so this video is about myths from different countries, so I could talk about how Atlasvpn lets you access region-locked content. When you think about it, ancient mythology and virtual private networks are basically the same thing. Demeter spent so much time searching for her daughter when she could have been searching the internet without pesky website cookies tracking her data. You know, Osiris might not have died if he had the kind of protection Atlasvpn offered. Man, Persephone was so hard to find, you'd think she was using Atlasvpn to keep her location private. Okay, it turns out I'm not very good at this yet, so I'm just gonna jump right into the ad. Atlasvpn is the most affordable way to stay safe online, and to avoid some annoying restrictions, and right now they're offering a huge discount. You can get a 3-year subscription to their service covering unlimited devices for just $1.99 a month, all with a 30-day money-back guarantee. That makes Atlas the best deal out there for a VPN that will meet all of your needs. Want to make sure no one's trying to hack into your phone or laptop on public Wi-Fi? Well, with Atlas activated, all the data going through your device is encrypted end-to-end, so nobody can steal your social security number while you're fueling your caffeine addiction. Want to watch some top-tier anime like Akira on Netflix even though it's not available in the US? Why is Akira not available in the US? Just select a server in an available region like the UK and bam, you can watch that cool but physically impossible motorcycle slide all you want. Want to up your personal security by making sure none of your passwords have leaked? You can do that too with their data breach monitor, which will show you any websites you have an account on that have fallen victim to data leaks. And in making this part of the ad, I found out that 3 accounts attached to my personal email were in fact compromised. So actually, for real, thank you, Atlas. I'm gonna go change all my passwords now. So if you want to get Atlasvpn while it's still just $1.99 a month, click the link in the description to start your 3-year subscription risk-free for the first 30 days. Thanks for your support, Atlas. Now back to our mythological conundrum. Alright, you wouldn't be blamed for assuming that the Magic Nanny story originated in Egypt. After all, Egyptian civilization predates archaic Greece by over 2,000 years. But don't forget that cultures don't just rise fully formed and remain the same for their entire run. They evolve with each generation and can be influenced influenced by other cultures whose timeline overlaps with theirs. The general Osiris myth in Egypt goes way back, but the Egyptians didn't actually write that much about it because they had a taboo against recording super bad events. Talking too much about how your god king was murdered by his treacherous brother, it's just kind of a bad vibe. So we only have vague bits and pieces from various surviving hymns and spells on what happened according to Egyptian tradition. They basically just say that Osiris was killed in some manner by Set, and that Isis had to search for his body so she could bring him back to life and they could conceive Horus. And that's about as detailed as it gets. None of these sources mention the magic nanny story, so we have no reason to believe that that premise originated in Egypt. Instead, the magic nanny story is first found in the archaic Greek poem Homeric Hymn No. 2 to Demeter. This poem was written probably around 600 BC, and it covers the entire Persephone myth that I recounted earlier. That myth was extremely important to the cult of Demeter and Eleusis. Persephone's journey to the underworld and back was core to their understanding of the seasons and agriculture, and may have been the basis for a belief in a revival from death offered to her worshippers. And its version of the magic nanny story, where Demeter goes to Eleusis and has the king build her temple there, serves as the origin story for how their cult was established in the first place. So now the question is, how did this story formula that apparently originated in Greece end up in all of our Egyptian mythology books? And YouTube videos explaining Egyptian mythology. Like, comment, subscribe. Well, it all goes back to our boy Alex. Alex, the pretty alright guy. Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BC, and after his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy I, was appointed to govern that region of his empire. After the empire fell apart and all of Alex's friends were done fighting over the pieces, Ptolemy decided to promote himself to pharaoh, thus beginning the Ptolemaic dynasty. This era marks the point where Egypt became part of the Greek world, and the two cultures started sharing with each other more than ever before. And one cultural export from Egypt to really take off in Greece was the goddess Isis. You see, when you belong to a polytheistic religion that doesn't have a super strict universal doctrine, you can be a lot more open to accepting other people's beliefs as long as they don't conflict too much with your own. And if there are noticeable similarities between someone else's beliefs and yours, one naturally starts to wonder if they could have a common origin. Take, for instance, the core myths of Isis and Demeter that I recounted for you, not just the magic nanny parts, but the myths as a whole. The goddesses both suffer the death of a loved one, more metaphorically with Persephone, but whatever, and stricken with grief, they go in search of a way to bring them back, but in the end are only partially successful. And in their respective cultures, these myths serve as the basis for people's understanding of death and the afterlife. Now, I'm not trying to get into the possibility that these two myths actually did originate from some unknown shared source. There's simply no hard evidence to support that idea. But if I can notice these similarities, you can bet that an ancient Greek and an ancient Egyptian sharing stories with each other would too. And this is when syncretism happens, when people notice that two gods sound super similar and or serve a similar religious function, and come to believe that they must be manifestations of the same divine being. And so, as Isis became more popular in Greece, even getting her own temple built in Athens, we start to see Isis cults pop up modeled after the Eleusinian Demeter cult, indicating that in many people's minds, the two goddesses were now considered to be one. And if Isis was merged with Demeter in some people's religion, you can bet that the same went for her in mythology. And this mythological syncretism between Isis and Demeter is most notably evidenced in the work of Plutarch. Plutarch was a Greek philosopher and Delphic priest who lived around the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, and one of his many literary works was his essay on Isis and Osiris called On Isis and Osiris, which, surprise, was the source I used for my retelling of the Osiris myth at the beginning of this video, because it is the first extant piece of literature to include the magic nanny story with Isis instead of Demeter. And this source is referenced in just about all modern retellings of the Osiris myth, but when you think about it, that doesn't actually feel right. Plutarch was Greek, and his understanding of Egyptian beliefs were clearly distorted by that. He doesn't just conflate Isis and Demeter, he also puts the Greek monster Typhon in place of Set, and his recount of the Osiris myth is filled with a bunch of other stuff that's nowhere to be found in authentic Egyptian sources. But again, the ancient Egyptian sources don't give us that much information on the Osiris myth in the first place. So we kinda need later Greek writers like Plutarch, even if there's no way of knowing for sure how much of their version is authentic to Egyptian tradition. It's kinda like how we use the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson as a main source for Norse mythology, even though it was written by a Christian. It probably doesn't paint a perfect picture of that culture's culture's beliefs, but we don't have much else to work with, so it's a whole lot better than nothing. So yeah, there's your answer to a comparative mythology question that you may or may not have ever thought to ask. It really puzzled me when I first noticed it, so I hope you got a kick out of it too. I think when people notice similarities between myths from different cultures, they'll often make simple assumptions like that the older culture's mythology influenced the younger's, but not vice versa, or that they just came from a common cultural ancestor. But in reality, things can have much more complicated history behind them, so it's always worth looking into. Bye.